Hi everyone, it's a new year, and that means a new video going through all of the Tenkara rods that I own and that I'll be fishing with this year. I have 38 Tenkara rods to show you guys and to give a brief review of, so let's get started. I'm going to be covering these rods in 4 different categories. The first category is cheap non-Tenkara rods. So these are rods made for other kinds of fixed line fishing, but they can be used as Tenkara rods, possibly. And these are usually super cheap, like as cheap as $3 from AliExpress, going up to about $20 or $25. The second category is cheap Tenkara rods, or Tenkara-ish rods. These are rods, all of them are made in China, I believe, that are in the, I'll say, $40 to $75 range. And these are marketed as Tenkara rods. Category number 3 is Tenkara rods from American companies. And then category number 4 is Tenkara rods from Japanese companies. You'll notice as I go through these rods that I actually haven't fished a surprising number of them. I've been acquiring a lot of rods the last few months, and because I don't fish as much in winter, I haven't had a chance to fish these. But as we go through the year, as we go through 2022, I will be fishing with these, so you'll see these in videos to come in the future. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to go over what I would choose if I could just have 1 rod, or 2 rods, or 3 rods. And that'll be geared toward my personal tastes and the style of fishing that I do, but it still might be helpful for you. So with that, let's get into the super cheap non-Tenkara rod category, the first category. I have them all laid out on my desk in front of me here. Let's start with these rods. I think I have 7 of them. I call these the generic yellow bamboo rod, and bamboo is in quotation marks. They're kind of segmented to be like bamboo. I don't know if you can see that. And then they have kind of a bamboo or a plant little drawing on them. I have these in, let's see what lengths. Almost every length between 180 centimeters and 360. So I have 180, 210, 240, 270, 300. I don't have 330, but I do have 360. I haven't fished all of these, and you'll notice that a few of these have cork handles on them, cork grips. So these were sent to me by a viewer. So thank you, Robert, for sending these to me. I haven't fished them yet, but I've got the 180 here. I've got the 270, and I think this is the 240. And out of all of these rods, I have fished the 180 a couple of times, and it's surprisingly not bad. And these rods range from, let's see, I'm looking at my little cheat sheet here. These range from $6 to about $10 on AliExpress, if you can find them. Sometimes they're also on eBay and Amazon. I'll put links to all of these rods in the video description if I can. Especially with these cheap rods, the links kind of come and go, so I may or may not be able to find links for all of these for you, but I'll do my best. The 180 is a decent little tiny creek rod, and then I have fished the 2 biggest ones, the 300 and the 360. The 360 was not good. It was just way too heavy, too much momentum when casting, just not a comfortable rod to fish with. The 300 was okay. It was fishable, and it wasn't abysmal, but it wasn't a great rod. It was workable, but not amazing. And then next up we have the GOTURE Breeze. This is a long guy, kind of a longish rod. Again, with some bamboo. I don't know if you can see the little joints here, made to look like bamboo. This rod was about $25 from Amazon. You can also buy it on AliExpress. This also is an okay rod if you want to spend like $25 or less, kind of like this 300 centimeter one. These 2 rods, I mean, if you can find this, it'll be like $9. This is $25. If that is the top end of your budget, then those 2 rods can work for you, and the smaller ones too are decent. But those 2 rods, I think, are the best longer rods in this general category. These cheap Chinese non-Tenkara rods. These are rods that you never really forget that you're fishing with, but they can be used if you want to give them to a kid, or if you want to take someone fishing and and you don't want to hand them your $300 fancy Japanese rod, then yeah, one of these will work. But it's not going to be the best possible experience you can have when doing Tenkara style fishing. My favorite rod in this category, because it's the weirdest rod in this category and all the categories, is this. This is what I call the lipstick rod. It is I believe it's an 8-foot, about 240 centimeter rod. And it unscrews and it just becomes a little stiff, and I think it might even be plastic. Like it's a weird material. It's not graphite or fiberglass. It's or carbon fiber rather. It's a weird little rod. I have fished it once before. I've shown it briefly in part of a Tenkara Addict video, but I've never done a full video with this. If you'd like to see that, let me know. It's not a great rod. That's why I don't fish with it. That's why I don't fish with most of these rods more than one time. I have better rods that I'd rather fish with. And then next up we have these 3 weird little rods that I'm grouping together. I bought all of these from AliExpress, and they're all short. This one is 150 centimeters, and it is so stiff. It is, I think, the stiffest rod that I own. I thought it might be good as a little Tanago, little micro fishing rod, but it is just, I mean, calling it a broomstick is doing a disservice to broomsticks. It does not like to bend. So if you want to go after, 18 or 20 inch trout with a little 5-foot long rod, maybe this might be good, but otherwise not very good. This one I call the cigarette rod because it kind of looks like a cigarette. Also very stiff. I've actually seen people selling these on eBay. I wouldn't buy one. I've fished with this one time and it was too stiff to really be enjoyable. Similar story with this one. So this one, the cigarette one, is 180 centimeters, so that's 6 feet. And then this silver one is also 6 feet and is also too stiff for me to enjoy fishing with. And then the final rod in this category is a relatively recent acquisition for me, just a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if I should put this one in this category or not. It was, let me look at my cheat sheet here, $29 from Amazon, and it's called the Professional Trust RAKUTSURI BITTERLING Universal 120. That's what the product title on Amazon is. And I bought this because I wanted to try some micro fishing this year, going after pretty small fish. And this is definitely softer than these sub $10 AliExpress rods, but I haven't fished with it. I am looking forward to fishing with it. 120 centimeters, so that's about 4 feet long. I think that makes it the shortest, or at least one of the shortest rods I own. And it's a decently soft little rod. I don't know if it's soft enough for like 1-inch fish, but it's soft enough for 2 or 3-inch fish. So it'll be interesting to put this to use and see how it works out this year. That's it for category 1. Let's move on to category 2, which is the cheap Tenkara-ish rods made in China and not made by any of the more well-known American Tenkara companies. So first off, I have 3 rods from a company called Fishing Time USA. I originally came across these guys on eBay, and this was the first rod of theirs that I bought. This is the 2.7 meter rod. Kind of an interesting handle shape, an interesting rod in general because it's a little bit long. I paid, I think, about $27 plus shipping for this. For all these rods, I'm going to be putting a price on the screen. That's just a rough estimate of what the price was. I fished with this rod once, and it was a surprisingly good rod, and I think I sold all of them out when I made the video about this rod, and I don't think they've been in stock since. I looked at the Fishing Time USA website yesterday, and I didn't even see any Tenkara rods anymore, so I don't know if that's something that they're gonna continue to make, or if they're gonna stick to other kinds of fishing gear, but a surprisingly good rod. I like that it's long. Is relatively long, and so that means that there are relatively few sections, which means in general it has the potential to be not quite as stiff as other rods might be, and that turned out to be the case. It was a nice little rod. Like I had no problems fishing with this rod. And then I mentioned in that video that if that video got to a certain number of likes, then I would buy the 360 centimeter, the 3.6 meter or 12-foot version of that rod, and I did, and I fished with it. And this is not a very good rod. The 2.7 meter is much better. This one, not great. It's heavy. I mean, it's noticeably heavy when you lift it, when you hold it, but it's also heavy in the hand as you're fishing with it. just not a good rod. So this is one that I wouldn't recommend. I do like the fact that it has no markings on it. This is how I would like every Tenkara rod to be. No text, no diagrams, no pictures, just black. I do like that, but otherwise it's not a very good rod. And then when I think it was when I ordered this rod, the owner of Fishing Time USA, who's a very nice guy who I've communicated with through email a few times, he sent me this rod for free because he was phasing out these rods. And this is also a 12-foot or 360 centimeter rod. I have not fished with it. I have wiggled it around at home here, and it might be the stiffest big rod I own. Like, I wiggle it and just the very tip section wiggles around. The majority of the rod does not. You know, I'm not really looking forward to fishing this rod, but I'll fish with it at some point, and maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe it's a great rod, but I don't have super high hopes for it. And then next up, let's go to two rods by another company called AVENTIK. This is a Chinese company that makes a ton of fishing gear, like all types of fishing gear for various kinds of fishing. This is the AVENTIK IM12 NANO Tenkara 9-foot 10 section 6'4". This is another rod that I was surprised by. Along with this one, these are the two best rods in this category. A couple of you guys emailed me about this rod and said that I should try it, and so I did. Really nice little rod. It's light, it's short, it feels good, it has no grip. As you can tell, has no, cork grip or foam grip. But this section is kind of a matte finish, and I don't mind rods without a grip. I have several of them that I'll be showing with you. Doesn't bother me. I probably prefer it just because they're lighter, maybe a little bit more sensitive. You can feel fish better, you can feel what's going on a little bit better, maybe. That's the theory. I like them. And then I bought the 12-foot version of that rod, which is definitely heavier. It is the AVENTIK IM12 NANO Tenkara 12-foot 13 section 6'4" action. Have not fished with this rod. I'll be fishing with this once the weather gets a little bit more compatible with fishing without suffering. And then I have, let's see, this is the Max Catch Tenkara Mini, another short, compact travel rod. This is a 12-foot rod, and I did not like this rod. I felt it was stiff and heavy, and it felt heavy. And that's kind of an easy way to describe how a cheap Tenkara rod feels versus a good Tenkara rod feels. A cheap Tenkara rod will feel that heft. It won't feel as nice to cast. It will feel stiff and heavy, whereas a good Tenkara rod will feel light. It'll feel well balanced. It'll cast well. And so a lot of the cheaper rods don't do those things well. And that was the case with this rod. Not a fan of that rod. And kind of in a similar vein is this rod, which you guys have not seen in a video, although I have filmed a video with it. It'll be coming out sometime in the next couple of weeks. Actually, it's already filmed and edited, ready to go. This is the GOTURE Capella 12-foot 7.3 rod. Not a great rod. Did not like this rod. I think I maybe liked it a little bit better than this one, but not a fan. I wouldn't really, under any circumstance, buy either of these rods if I could help it. Unless I were on a very strict budget, like $60 or under, and I needed a travel rod that was under a certain length, maybe I'd go for one of these rods, but otherwise, they're just really not great rods. One more thing before we move on from this category. My very first ever Tenkara rod was from Amazon. It was the Wild Water Tenkara rod. It came in a kit. It was like $99. It was pretty cheap. I didn't know anything about Tenkara when I bought it. I have since sold that rod, but I think the person who I sold it to watches these videos. If you are that person, and if you still have that rod, I'd like to buy it back from you. I think it'd be fun to have my first ever rod back. So if you want to sell that rod, send me an email. I'll put a link to my contact form on my website, on the SUV RVing website if you want to get in touch. And I'll buy that rod back for more than it's worth, but just thought I'd throw that out there. And then that brings us to the next category, the third out of 4 categories, which is Tenkara rods from American companies. So I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these rods. Let's start off with the Tiny 10. This is a really cool looking little rod. Like, I love how small and compact it is. If nothing else, It's a really fun little Tenkara souvenir. I paid $52 for this. The price is now up to 80 something dollars. I would not pay $80 for this rod. I have fished this once and I thought it was pretty bad. It's so stiff that it just wasn't that fun to fish with. I know people like these rods. I've heard from them. I've gotten people on the video where I fish with this rod saying that that I'm wrong, that it's actually a really good rod. Maybe it is for your use case, or maybe I'm just not fishing with it right. Who knows, you know, whatever. All of this is just my opinion. Take it with a grain of salt. You shouldn't listen to me, whatever. Standard disclaimers apply, but I didn't like this rod. They do have a larger version, the Tiny 10 2, which is 8 feet. This is 5 feet when extended. The 8-foot long version, I've seen much better reviews about it online. That seems to be a better rod. I don't know, I haven't fished with it, so I can't say, but this one, I like having it. It's just a cool little thing. It's unique in how just small and kind of cute it is, but I don't like fishing with it. This next one is the Rare Gear Tiny Cast. You might have seen me recently do basically an unboxing video of this rod on this channel here. And the thing that makes this rod unique is that it has these line winders rather, built in right here. This is about a 10-foot rod. It's like 9 feet, 10 inches. It comes with this furled line here that you can attach to the rod. And, you know, I don't have high hopes for this rod as far as like a really nice feeling or casting Tenkara rod. Rare is a company that makes these telescoping traditional fly rods. Really cool looking, really interesting. If you're into regular fly fishing, go check those out. As for Tenkara, it seems kind of cheap, like this little part right here. It's plastic and like there's some kind of shoddy glue work on here. Like I can see glue coming up above the little plastic piece. It's just, it doesn't seem like a great rod. Again though, I'm looking forward to fishing it and, you know, prove me wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Next up is one of my favorite rods. This is the Zentikara Suzumi. This was the second rod I ever bought. I sold that first rod, that wild water rod, in order to help finance this rod, because this is a kind of a pricey rod. This is a triple zoom rod. It goes from, let's see, it has the measurements here, from 7 foot 7 inches to 10 feet 8 inches. So about 7.5 feet to a little bit under 11 feet. I really like zoom rods, these adjustable length rods, when I'm fishing small creeks. I think they're really helpful in a lot of different situations. I think zoom rods kind of get a bad rap, at least from what I read online. People don't like them. I think that for small creeks, they make a lot of sense. I think when you get to the bigger zoom rods, they don't make quite as much sense, but for small stuff, they're really nice. This is a very light rod. I like how thin the grip section is, and it just feels nice. But I've also caught trout up to 16 inches on this. I've caught multiple 16-inch trout on here, so it can handle a decent sized fish, but it's also good for catching, you know, little guys. I did replace the 2 tip sections on this rod with 2 tip sections from one of the Tenkara USA rods, I forget. Basically, I did that to follow Tom Davis's advice from Teton Tenkara. That's what he did with this rod. He found the stock 2 tip sections of this rod to be a little bit too soft for his liking, so he replaced them with the other tip sections, and that resulted in kind of a crisper hook set, a better hook set. And so I did the same thing and I haven't looked back. You can buy what Zentikara calls their performance tip. So if you wanted to buy directly from them, you could do that. I'll put a link to the blog post where Tom talks about that in the video description if you want to learn more. Really like this rod. This is probably my favorite small stream rod. I think it's really versatile, it feels really nice, and I've just had really good luck with it. I've caught hundreds and hundreds of fish on this rod. Really nice little rod. Next up is the Tanuki XL1. This is a 13-foot 3-inch or 405 centimeter rod. This is a really beautiful rod. It casts so well. It's so light. I think it's the lightest rod of this length with, you know, a traditional handle, lighter even than Japanese rods like this. I think it's a little bit soft for me the more I fish with this rod. I've found that I lose a lot of fish with this rod. Now that's probably user error. Maybe I'm just not setting the hook well enough, but I think that, you You know, I lose a lot of fish when I'm setting the hook or soon after I set the hook with this rod. I think the tip is a little bit soft for me, but I can't deny that it's a really nice rod. It's a pleasure to fish with, it's a pleasure to cast. It's an expensive rod, it's as expensive as premium Japanese rods, but if this rod fits what you're looking for, I can recommend it. It's really nice. I don't find myself reaching for it as much as I have in the past. 2021 was the second year that I had with this rod. I didn't fish with it as much because I don't like losing fish, and for whatever reason, I feel like I lost more fish with this rod. And so even though I don't fish with it as much, I do like it. Next up is the one and only rod I have from Tenkara Rod Company. This is the TRC Yari. And this is a really interesting rod because it is made in Japan. It was made in Japan. Unlike these other American Tenkara companies, all these rods are made in China. This one is actually made in Japan by, it is assumed, one of the better Tenkara rod manufacturers, Tenru. Really nice rod. I think it's a beautiful rod. I love the handle on this. I love the coloring. I love basically everything about this rod. I feel like in general, the rods from Tenkara Rod Company are overpriced. I haven't fished with most of their rods, so this is all just hearsay, but they seem to be stiff for what they are. And so the combination of them being stiff and overpriced, and for some other things that I won't get into, I don't have huge desires to fish with other rods from this company, but I backed this one on Kickstarter because it is unique in the fact that it was made by a Japanese company, or it was made in Japan. And it really is a beautiful rod. I don't fish with this rod a ton for the same reason that I don't fish with other 12-foot Tenkara rods a ton. I don't find that size extremely useful, which might be a weird thing to say because a lot of Tenkara literature will say to buy a 12-foot rod as your first rod because that's kind of the average Tenkara rod. That's a general purpose Tenkara rod. I've found that I'm either fishing a smaller stream, in which case I want something like the Zentikara Suzumi, which is much smaller than this, or I'm fishing big wide open water, and in that case, why wouldn't I fish a longer rod? Why wouldn't I fish a 400 centimeter rod or even bigger? And so really through no fault of its own, I don't fish this rod too much, but it is really nice. It feels very crisp when casting, really nice casts with this rod. And then I have 4 different rods from Dragontail Tenkara. Let's start off with the shortest and go up toward the longest. This is the newest one, the Dragontail Foxfire. This one still has its plastic on the handle here. I haven't taken this off. I had one of these from Dragontail to review and make videos about, and I fished with it a lot. Then I sent that one back, and then like the next day, I got this one in the mail. And so I haven't fished with this particular one yet, but I have fished with this rod several times. And the unique thing about this rod, again, it's a triple zoom rod, so it can be fished at 3 different lengths, but this one goes down really short to like 6 feet or 6.5 feet or somewhere around there. And that's, I think, the sweet spot for this rod. Those shortest 2 lengths especially I really liked with this rod. And so in the second half of 2021, I did a fair amount of small stream, like really small stream, really small creek, like overgrown creek fishing with this rod. And I will continue to do so next year. This is probably my favorite small stream rod. Like if I'm fishing just a general small stream rod, the Zentikara Suzumi is probably my favorite. Like if it's big enough where I can actually cast. But if the stream on average is a little bit smaller than that and more overgrown than that, then I will reach for this rod. Really nice little rod. Next up is another favorite rod of mine. This is the Dragontail Mizuchi. Again, a triple zoom rod. This rod is more stiff than either the Foxfire or the Suzumi. And so if I'm fishing a stream where I think there might be bigger fish, like into 12, 13, 14, 15 inches, this rod just handles those fish better. Because it's stiff, you can really, manhandling sounds bad, but you can really direct the fish toward you. You can really control the fish better than you can with, especially the Foxfire. This is a very soft rod. I would use this rod mostly for small fish. With bigger fish, like, 10, 11, 12 inches and up, in a small stream, I felt like I didn't have a ton of control with this rod. This rod, you can get those fish quickly into your net, and that's really useful in a small creek where there are lots of trees and rocks, lots of places for fish to hide quickly. You know, they're nearby. And so getting the fish into the net quickly means that you have a better chance of obviously landing that fish, whereas if you work the fish, if you play the fish for a long time, the line will just get snagged somewhere and you're going to lose that fish. And so this is a really great rod if you're routinely catching bigger fish. And this is all relative, of course, right? Like, we're not talking about 25-inch trout here, but like fish in the teens, or like I said, 11, 12 inches, somewhere in that range, where they're starting to get a little bit bigger. This rod is perfect for that. And it'll also fish well for small fish, but like for really little guys, you know, it's not super fun, especially fighting them on this rod. You can just kind of like do this and they'll come to you. But this is one of my favorite rods for the right situation. Next up is the Dragon Tail Mutant. Again, a triple zoom rod. This one is on the softer side and it's longer. And I haven't fished with this rod a ton because, again, once you get into the longer rod lengths, I think that a zoom rod becomes a little bit less useful and less interesting to me. I've fished with this rod maybe 4 or 5 times, and I like it. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. It's just not, again, it's not like a super interesting rod to me. This would be a good first Tenkara rod to get if you're going to catch, you know, average-sized trout in an average-sized little stream. This can be a good option. The shortest length here is short enough for a decently small creek, and the largest length is good enough for basically any open stream, any smallish river. And then the last rod in this category, and the last dragon tail rod that I have, is the Nirvana 400. So this is made to be a bigger fish rod, and I don't fish with it a ton because I don't really catch bigger fish. I don't really fish for bigger fish. I like small streams. In general, I don't really care about the size of fish that I'm catching. I'm much more interested in the size of the creek that I'm fishing. I like fishing small creeks, and small creeks tend to have small fish, and so I don't find that I need this rod very often. But I have caught some good fish on this. I caught an 18-inch salmon on this rod and hooked into some bigger ones on this rod a couple years ago. I don't love this rod, and so I'm not going to fish with it just for normal fishing. I'm only going to fish with it if I'm really going after bigger fish. Brent, who is the owner of Dragon Tail, he designed this rod basically for the kind of fishing that he does, which is for bigger fish with a furled line. And I just don't do that kind of fishing. And so for me, it just feels a little bit clunky to fish with this rod for the kind of fishing I do. But if it works for the kind of fishing you want to do, go for it. I personally don't love this rod. It's probably my least favorite dragon tail rod. When I'm casting, you know, every cast is kind of a chore with this rod for me. Again, your mileage may vary. If you're casting a lighter line for regular sized fish, you don't need a rod like this. And then that brings us now to the fourth category. This is Tenkara rods made by Japanese companies. They're not necessarily made in Japan, but they're made by Japanese companies. Tenkara, of course, originated in Japan, and so the general consensus is that Japanese rods are better, or at least can be better, depending on the type of fishing you do. Japanese rods just feel, in general, lighter, they cast better, in general, again, as a broad category, and so these are just really nice, fancy, generally kind of expensive rods. I'm going to start off with one that is not expensive and not very fancy. I bought this one a couple weeks ago when I bought that other little Tanago rod, that other little microfishing rod. I bought this from, let me check here, neverstopfishing.com. It was $35, and it is the Takamiya HB Concept Shirataki rod. And when I bought this rod, it came obviously in a little sleeve, came with some packaging, and it said made in China, but it was for a Japanese company. Like, there was a Japanese address on there and everything like that. So I'm including this rod in this category, even though I don't think it's an especially amazing rod. It might be a little bit too stiff for really small micro fishing. It's a 120 centimeter, so 4 foot long rod. Very short rod. It is a little bit stiffer than this $30 one that I bought off of Amazon. But I'm excited to test both of these out in the new year. And then now let's go to these rods. I'm going to put these together because they're 2 different lengths of the same rod. This is the Shimotsuki Kiyotaki 180 and 270. These are little Keiru rods, or Keiryu, however you say it. And they're stiff little rods. The 270 especially is pretty stiff, and I haven't loved fishing with this. I'm not going to reach for it very often. The 180 is a nice little tiny creek rod. Up until I got the Dragon Tail Foxfire, this is my really tiny creek rod of choice. And it still might be if there are going to be bigger fish, because again, this is stiffer, so it'll handle bigger fish better than the Foxfire. But these are hard to get. I don't even know if they're made anymore. The 270 you can buy on eBay. I was looking at some of them last night. Comes in a bunch of different lengths. You can buy this in like, I think even a 360 centimeter length if you want to. I haven't fished with those, but if you can find the 180, go ahead and pull the trigger. It's a nice little rod and they're rare, but otherwise, I don't think you need to mess with these rods. Now let's go with a few different rods by Nissen. Nissen is one of the larger Tenkara rod manufacturing companies. This is the Pro Square Super Tenkara 6.4 action 360 centimeter rod. This is I think it's the cheapest Tenkara rod made in Japan. Now it's not the cheapest made by a Japanese company, because again, they make rods in other countries, but this one is actually made in Japan by a Japanese company. I think it's about $135 depending on where you find it. I really like this rod. It's a really, really nice casting rod. I like how it feels. The only thing I didn't like about this rod is the handle, more specifically the handle shape. You'll see that there's this one hump here, and then it flares out on the end. Other rods, like this one that we'll get to in a second, it has this one hump here, and it gets narrow again. Then it has another hump, and it gets narrow again. This one does not get narrow again at the end. It's kind of an abrupt end. It's kind of like a right angle here. And I don't really like this shape. It's fine if you're holding it up here, but I often hold rods down here, and for that, I didn't find this handle shape very comfortable. I don't know if that would necessarily prevent me from buying this in the first place, because again, it's a good deal, it's a great rod, but I did not like that. And so I guess let's go to that next rod as long as we have it out here. This is the Nissen Zero Sum 7.3 360. It's a beautiful rod. This is one of the higher end Tenkara rods. It retails for about $265 or $280, somewhere in that range. It's not cheap, but it's a really beautiful rod. This might be one of the more precise rods that I have as far as casting goes. When you cast with this rod, it's just like the fly just makes a bullseye for where you're aiming. Really nice rod. It can handle a decent sized fish, and it feels, I mean, it feels great. I think that in general, I prefer the 6.4 action of this rod. If I were to buy it again, I think I'd probably go with the 6.4 action. I got a good deal on this rod used, and so I have no regrets. It's a beautiful rod. I enjoy fishing with it, but the 6.4 is just a little bit nicer to cast. This casts cleaner and crisper, if that makes sense, but this casts just nicer. It's softer, more gentle on the cast. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I feel about it anyway. Great rod in whatever action, whatever length you buy it in. I'm sure you'll be happy with that rod. It's a beautiful rod. And now we're gonna get into 3 rods that have been sent to me by Robert, the same viewer who sent me those generic yellow bamboo rods with the custom cork handle that he put on them. He watches these videos and he has sent me 3 really nice, beautiful Japanese Tenkara rods in the last month or so. And I say Tenkara, but again, these are like Keiru and Seiru rods, but I'm gonna be using them for Tenkara style fishing. And the first one is the Nissen Pocket Mini V3 300. It's just a very delicate, beautiful little rod. And I think I'm calling it delicate on it, and I'm a little bit concerned about fishing with this because I've seen a lot of people online say how delicate this is and that they have broken sections of this rod. But it is so cool. It is so small. Again, this is the 300, or what is that, 10-foot version of this rod. It comes in various sizes, but I mean, that's only like 9 inches long. Just a beautiful little work of art rod, and I'm really looking forward to fishing this one with very small tippet to protect this rod. Like, I'll be fishing this with probably 7x tippet. And then next up, this is probably the most, well, this is definitely the lightest rod I own. This is the Nissen Air Stage Hakubai 240. And I'm sure I'm butchering all these Japanese pronunciations, forgive me, but this rod comes in two versions as far as stiffness goes. I think this is the stiff one, but that doesn't mean that it's a stiff rod, it's just stiff compared to the other one. I haven't fished with this rod, but from what I understand, it's a very just light and delicate and beautiful rod. And it is so light, guys. When I first got this rod and took it out, I was just amazed by how this rod felt. It's nothing. It is so, casting this is gonna feel so awesome. I'm really excited to fish with this. I've never seen or fished or held anything else like this before. If you want the ultimate rod that feels like you're fishing with nothing, I think this is the one to get. And kind of its bigger brother is the Suntech Kurenai HM33R. Again, no handle here. This is an 11-foot rod, very light, very soft, and just really, apparently, beautifully casting rod. And this is another one that I'm really, really looking forward to fishing. And then next up we have what is probably, if not my favorite rod, one of my two favorite rods. This is the Daiwa Siguri 45MC. This is a zoom rod. It goes from 40 centimeters to 450, so that's what, like 13 feet to 14.5 feet, almost 15 feet. And I said before that zoom rods, that adjustable length rods in the bigger sizes don't make a ton of sense to me, because it doesn't really make much of a difference if you're fishing with a 13 or 14 foot rod, I've found, when you're fishing just a big river that's wide open. But in spite of that, this is such a beautiful rod. It casts so nicely at either length, and I've fished it a lot at both lengths. I love this rod. It comes in another length. It comes in a 30, let's see, it's the Daiwa Siguri 39 MC. That one is a little bit hard to get right now. It's out of stock in the normal places like Tenkara Bomb. I don't think he's sold these for a while, and it's out of stock on Tenkara also. If you have the 39 version of this rod, I would like to buy it from you. Send me an email. Again, I'll put a link to my contact form in the video description. I would like to buy that rod from you because I love this rod so much. I've never fished with the shorter one, but I assume it's just as good. And it's just a pleasure to cast with. It's so light for its length. It just feels like you're casting nothing, and the line almost casts itself. And I think that's how these other rods, the Hakubai and the Kurenai, I think these are a similar kind of thing, just on a smaller scale, on a shorter scale. This rod is just so fun. It's a pleasure to cast. It's made in Thailand, not Japan, but I don't care where it's made. It could be made in your mom's basement for all I care. It's such a good rod. If you can find one of these, go pick it up. I don't think you'll regret it. And please, I want to buy the other version of this rod. Please get in touch if you have one. And then as far as rods go that I used to have that I don't have anymore, I already mentioned the Wild Water Tenkara rod, the super cheap rod that wasn't all that great. I sold that one. And then I also had a Tenkara Bomb 40, the TB40, and that was such a nice rod. That is a beautiful rod. I kind of wish I still had that rod, but I sold it because I broke the I broke this bottommost section. It snapped like right here, just above the handle, as I was casting with it. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And that frustrated me, and it would have cost like $90 or $95 with shipping to replace that. And so I didn't want to spend that much money on it because I didn't have that much money to spend on it. And so I sold it. I do miss that rod. That was a really beautiful rod, a beautifully casting rod, but it's also an expensive rod, and I just couldn't afford to fix it really at the time. And I thought that if it happened again, I really wouldn't be able to fix it. So I got rid of it instead of dealing with it more. And then there are two other rods that I have coming to me, actually. The first is the Tenkara USA Roto. This is a triple zoom rod, kind of similar to something like the Zentikara Suzumi or the Dragontail Mizuchi. It's for small streams. It goes from like 8 feet something to 10 feet something. I bought that rod because I do use these small triple zoom, small creek rods so much. That's the other major rod in that size class, and so I wanted to try that out. And I've never fished with any Tenkara USA rods before. Their rods to me in general just seem overpriced. Like I was looking at them yesterday, and the very cheapest Tenkara USA rod is still more expensive than every Dragontail Tenkara rod except for one. And so it's hard for me to get excited about spending $250 on a rod that isn't all that different from what else is out there on the market. So that's the reason I haven't tried more Tenkara USA rods. Same reason I haven't tried more Tenkara Rod Company rods. They're just expensive, and I don't see the value there. I'd rather buy a Japanese rod for that money. But anyway, I found a good deal on eBay for the Tenkara USA Roto, so that'll be here in a few days. And then Robert, the guy who keeps sending me all of these rods, again, thank you, Robert, for doing that. He saw the video from last week where I mentioned that I'm going to Alaska and we'll be fishing for salmon up there. Hopefully I can find some salmon to catch up there in Alaska. He kind of rightly realized that I don't have a rod big enough to go proper salmon fishing with, so he ordered and sent me a Zentikara Kyojin 2, which is their spay rod. It's a two-handed Tenkara rod. It's got a long cork grip on it, made for big fish. They say that they've caught like bonefish and tarpon on that rod on the Zentikara website, so should be really interesting. That'll also be a good carp rod for me. And then other rods that I'm gonna be buying or looking at this year are either the Dragontail Hellbender or the Tau Tenkara, which is formerly Badger Tenkara Wisco 2. Those are two like big fish rods, and I want another big fish rod in addition to the Kyojin 2 to be basically a backup. I want to have two rods that are capable of catching big fish, because I don't want to be in Alaska and break a rod on a fish for whatever reason and not have another rod that I can use to handle like a really big fish. So at some point this year, I'm going to be getting one of those rods. Not sure which one, not sure when, but that's the plan anyway. And then each year there are usually 2 or 3 rods that pop up on a Kickstarter. I'm gonna get whatever those are from whatever companies they are. I like backing those. I like being one of the first to have these rods and fish with them. So whatever rods I see on Kickstarter, unless it's something just like completely out of my wheelhouse, then I probably wouldn't be interested in that. But if it's any kind of Tenkara rod that'll work for the kind of fishing I do, I'll probably get that. But nothing else specifically I'm going after. Let me know what kind of rods you want me to get. I'm not against buying more rods this year. I obviously don't need more rods, but I buy them because I like fishing new rods for the same reason that I like fishing new creeks. It's fun, it's a challenge, it's interesting to me. And then also I think they make for good and interesting videos for you guys. So it's kind of a win-win thing. So let me know if there's a specific rod you want me to try out this year. Oh, also one other rod that I might try out is the Wasatch Tenkara Maruki Sharpshooter. It's another triple zoom rod, very short. It starts at like 6 feet and goes up from there. They have a 6'4" version that's on back order. I might get that at some point, we'll see. Oh, and I almost forgot. In fact, I did forget. I wrapped up the video and I forgot to mention what my favorite rods are and what I would recommend if I could only have 1 or 2 or 3 rods. So let me fix that here. If I could only have 1 rod, it would probably be the Zentikara Suzumi, just because again, it fits perfectly with the type of fishing I do. Your mileage may vary. If I could have 2 rods, you know, this covers the small end of the spectrum pretty well. If I could add another one, it would be the Daiwa Siguri 45 MC, which covers the big end of the spectrum really well. This isn't a rod made for big fish, but again, I don't really go for big fish, so it works great for me. And then if I could add a third, it'd probably be the Dragontail Mizuchi. I really like this rod, and it works in tandem well with this one. And these are the types of streams that I fish the most, these 2 size classes. And so if I'm going for slightly bigger fish, this is a great fish for that. I've caught trout up to 18 inches on this rod, and I didn't feel undergunned or anything. It worked really well. So 3 rods for me. These are the 3 rods: Daiwa Siguri 45 MC, Zentikara Suzumi, Dragontail Mizuchi. But again, for you, I don't know. I don't know what kind of rod you should get. I don't know what kind of fish you're going after. I don't know the size of stream they're going for. I don't know your preference as far as like casting goes. You know, different people like different rods just based on how they feel, so your mileage may vary. I would say that instead of asking me or any other one person what rod to get, go to one of the Tenkara Facebook groups and then ask there, and then you'll get advice from lots of different people. Be as specific as you can. Say where you are, what you'll be fishing for, the size of stream you'll be fishing, and be specific on the size, because a small stream means different things for different people. A small stream could be this big, it could be 20 feet wide, just depending on, you know, your reference point. So be specific, and I think that's your best way to find a rod for you. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, let me know what rod I should get next, and let me know if you have one of those rods that I'm searching for, and I'll see you guys soon in the next video.